The strange thing wasn't that Megan showed up at my door. The strange thing was that she looked like she'd already made a decision before I opened it. I just didn't know what decision that was. The knock came at exactly 10:47 on a Thursday night. I remember because I'd been staring at the clock when it happened. Not for any particular reason, just habit. After 4 years of living alone, you start noticing little things. The ticking of a clock, the sound of a refrigerator running, the way silence fills a house after dark. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 44 years old, divorced, and according to my younger brother, dangerously close to becoming a professional recluse. His words, not mine. I live in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina. Most days followed the same routine. Work, dinner, television, sleep. Nothing exciting, nothing complicated. And honestly, that was exactly how I liked it. Because complicated had nearly destroyed me once already. My divorce hadn't been dramatic. No screaming, no cheating, just two people slowly becoming strangers until one day they finally admitted it. That had been 4 years ago. Since then, I'd gotten very good at being alone, which is why I almost ignored the knock. Almost. The weather forecast had promised snow, but so far it was only rain. Cold rain. The kind that rattles against windows and makes the whole world feel farther away. I walked to the front door expecting a delivery driver, or maybe a neighbor. Instead, I found Megan Harper standing on my porch, and for a second I honestly thought I was imagining her. Megan. She looked exhausted. Her dark hair was damp from the rain. A heavy navy blue duffel bag hung from one shoulder. There were shadows beneath her eyes I didn't remember seeing before. Ethan. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. We stared at each other, trying to make sense of a moment neither of us had expected. The last time I'd seen Megan was nearly a year earlier at a community fundraiser. Before that, mostly through my ex-wife, because Megan had been Olivia's closest friend for almost 15 years, which made her the last person I expected to see on my porch, especially at nearly 11 o'clock at night. "Is everything okay?" I asked. A strange expression crossed her face, something between sadness and relief. "No," she said quietly. Then she glanced over her shoulder into the darkness. "As a matter of fact, it isn't." I waited for an explanation. It didn't come. Instead, she tightened her grip on the duffel bag. "I know this is a lot to ask," she said, "but could I stay here for a few days?" A few days. Not a night. Not until morning. A few days. Every instinct told me something was wrong. But another part of me noticed something else. Megan wasn't acting like someone looking for shelter. She was acting like someone who had run out of options. I stepped aside. "You'd better come in." For the first time all evening, her shoulders relaxed, only slightly, but enough to notice. She walked past me carrying the bag, and that's when I realized something. The duffel bag was much heavier than it should have been. Not clothes, not toiletries. Something else, something solid, something important. I didn't ask about it that night, but around midnight after Megan had gone to bed in the guest room, I was sitting in the living room when I heard a loud thud from down the hallway. Something had fallen, something heavy. A few seconds later, I heard Megan move quickly across the room, and the panic in those hurried footsteps told me one thing. Whatever was inside that duffel bag, she was terrified of anyone seeing it. The next morning, I would get my first glimpse of what she was hiding, and it would raise far more questions than answers. I didn't sleep much that night. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the look on Megan's face when she rushed across the guest room after whatever had fallen inside that duffel bag. Either way, I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being ridiculous. People carry strange things all the time. Family heirlooms, old documents, Personal belongings they don't want damaged. There were 100 reasonable explanations. At least that's what I told myself. The smell of coffee pulled me into the kitchen just after 7. To my surprise, Megan was already awake. She stood by the window wearing a borrowed sweatshirt I'd left outside the guest room. A mug rested between her hands as she watched the gray morning drizzle outside. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful. Then she noticed me, and that peace disappeared. "Morning," she said. "Morning." An awkward silence settled between us. Not hostile, just unfamiliar. The kind that exists when two people know each other through someone else, but suddenly find themselves alone together. "You sleep okay?" I asked. A faint smile appeared. "Not really." "Me neither." That earned a small laugh, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since arriving. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The weather, the town, work, nothing important. Nothing that explained why she was here. Then her phone rang. The reaction was immediate. Megan's shoulders stiffened. The color drained slightly from her face. She looked at the screen and declined the call. I pretended not to notice. 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. Same number, same reaction. This time she silenced it completely. "You don't have to ignore it because of me," I said. "I know." But she didn't answer. Instead, she slipped the phone into her pocket. That was when I noticed something else. The duffel bag. She'd brought it into the kitchen. Not unpacked it. Not left it in the guest room. Brought it with her. The bag rested beside her chair where she could touch it at any moment, as though she didn't trust it out of her sight. The feeling in my stomach returned. Whatever was inside that thing mattered. A lot. Later that afternoon, I came home early from work after a canceled meeting. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Megan. No answer. I found her in the spare bedroom. The duffel bag was open, only partially. She hadn't heard me approach, and for less than a second I saw what was inside. A wooden box, dark oak, old. The corners worn smooth with age. It wasn't large, but it looked heavy. Heavy enough to explain the weight of the bag. Megan noticed me. Immediately she zipped the bag shut. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us acknowledged what I'd seen. But something shifted, because now I knew she wasn't hiding money, or valuables, or anything illegal. She was protecting that box. The question was, why? That evening she barely touched her dinner. She seemed distracted, restless, like someone waiting for bad news. Then just after 10 o'clock I passed the guest room on my way to bed. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I heard her voice. Low, tense, almost whispering. "Please don't tell him where I am." A long pause. Then the sentence that stopped me cold. "If he finds out where I am, everything gets worse." I stood frozen in the hallway. Because until that moment, I'd assumed Megan was running from a difficult situation. Now I wasn't so sure. And for the first time since she'd arrived, I began wondering whether someone might actually be looking for her. Rehook. The next day, I decided to find out exactly what Megan wasn't telling me. What I discovered wasn't what I expected. Because the person I thought she was hiding from wasn't the real reason she'd come to my house at all. The next morning, I woke up convinced of one thing. Megan was hiding from someone. The phone calls, the wooden box, the nervous glances, the whispered conversation. Everything pointed in the same direction. And, honestly, I hated the feeling, not because I was scared, because I didn't like not knowing what was happening inside my own house. For 4 years, my life had been simple, predictable. Then, Megan showed up carrying a mysterious box and enough secrets to fill a novel. By lunchtime, curiosity had completely defeated common sense. I called an old friend who worked at the local community center. Not to investigate Megan. At least that's what I told myself. I simply wanted to know if anyone else had heard from her recently. What I learned surprised me. Megan had quit her job 3 weeks earlier, without warning, without another position lined up, without telling most of her co-workers. That didn't sound like the Megan I remembered. She'd always been responsible, careful, the kind of person who made backup plans for her backup plans. Quitting suddenly wasn't like her. Neither was disappearing. That evening, I found her sitting on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket. The wooden box sat beside her chair. For the first time, it wasn't hidden inside the duffel bag. She looked up when she heard me approach. Then her eyes immediately shifted toward the box, almost protective. I sat down across from her. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The autumn air felt colder than usual. Finally, I asked the question that had been living in my head for 2 days. "Are you in trouble?" She stared at me, then unexpectedly smiled. A sad smile, but genuine. "No." The answer came too quickly. "Are you sure?" "Yes." I studied her face. She looked exhausted, stressed, emotionally drained, but not frightened. And suddenly I realized something important. People running from danger usually look over their shoulder. Megan never did, not once. Instead, she always seemed to be looking inward, as though the thing troubling her wasn't behind her. It was inside her. That realization changed everything. "Then why are you here?" I asked quietly. The smile disappeared. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked toward the wooden box. "Because I couldn't stay there anymore." "There where?" "My old life." The answer frustrated me, because it wasn't really an answer at all. "What does that mean?" She laughed softly. The kind of laugh people make when they're standing near a truth they aren't ready to tell. I wish I knew how to explain it. I waited. Eventually she spoke again. "Have you ever spent years pretending something didn't matter?" The question caught me off guard. "Maybe." She nodded slowly. "Then you know how exhausting that can become." Before I could ask what she meant, she stood up. Conversation over. Just like that. She carried the wooden box back inside, leaving me alone with more questions than before. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I found myself thinking about that question. Have you ever spent years pretending something didn't matter? The strange thing was, I had. My marriage, my loneliness, the parts of myself I'd packed away after the divorce. Maybe that's why her words stayed with me. Maybe that's why I couldn't stop thinking about them. Or maybe it was because deep down I was starting to suspect that Megan hadn't come here because she was afraid of someone. She'd come because of something she'd been carrying for years. Something connected to that wooden box. And the next afternoon, I would discover the first real clue. Hidden beneath a stack of old papers inside that box was a photograph. A photograph that made absolutely no sense. Because the only person in it was me, Rehook. The moment I saw that photograph, I realized this story wasn't about what Megan was running from. It was about something she'd been moving toward for a very long time. I stared at the photograph for a long time. At first, I thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe it had fallen into the box accidentally. Maybe it belonged to someone else. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. The picture was old, at least 8 or 9 years old, and there was no question about who it showed. Me, standing in my backyard beside the grill during a 4th of July cookout. I remembered the day instantly, the weather, the food, the neighbors, even the ridiculous apron my brother had forced me to wear. What I didn't remember was anyone taking that particular picture, especially Megan. The realization sent a strange feeling through me. Why would she keep a photograph of me for nearly a decade? And more importantly, why would she carry it across the state inside a wooden box she treated like treasure? The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told myself I wasn't going to bring it up. I lasted less than an hour. Megan was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee when I walked in. The wooden box sat beside her, as usual, always within reach. I took a seat across from her. "We need to talk about something." Immediately, her expression changed. Not fear, recognition, like she'd known this moment was coming. "You saw it." It wasn't a question. I nodded. "The photograph." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Megan looked down at her coffee. "I was wondering how long it would take. Why do you have it?" A shadow crossed her face, the kind that appears when someone is standing between honesty and self-protection. "I don't know." I almost laughed. "That's not true." A tiny smile appeared. "No, it isn't." Finally, she looked up, and for the first time since arriving, she didn't avoid my eyes. It mattered to me. The answer should have explained everything. Instead, it raised 10 new questions. Why? Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug, and suddenly she looked exhausted again. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying a burden that had become too heavy. "I can't answer that yet." The words landed harder than they should have, because she didn't say she wouldn't answer. She said she couldn't, as if something was preventing her, as if the truth itself was dangerous. The rest of the day felt strange. Every conversation seemed unfinished. Every answer led to another mystery. Then that evening, while Megan was taking a shower, something unexpected happened. A single envelope slipped from between the papers inside the wooden box. I hadn't touched anything. It simply slid free when the lid shifted. The envelope was yellowed with age, unsealed, and on the front, written in neat handwriting, were 2 words. My name, Ethan Walker. My pulse quickened, because the envelope looked old. Very old. Years old. Long before Megan had shown up at my house. Long before the mysterious wooden box. Long before any of this started. I stared at it for nearly a minute, trying to decide whether I should open it. Part of me knew I shouldn't, but another part couldn't ignore a simple question. Why would Megan write me a letter she never sent? And what was inside that could remain hidden for years? A few moments later, I heard the bathroom door open down the hallway. I quickly stepped back from the box, but it was too late, because now I knew something important. The photograph wasn't the real secret. The letter was, and somehow I had a feeling it was about to change everything. That night, after staring at the envelope for nearly an hour, I finally made a decision. I was going to read the letter. What I found inside would completely destroy the story I'd been telling myself about Megan for years. I didn't sleep that night. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for nearly 3 hours while I argued with myself. Reading it felt wrong. It wasn't addressed to me anymore. At least not officially. Megan had never mailed it, never handed it to me, never even mentioned it. But every time I looked at that faded handwriting, the same question returned. Why write a letter if you never intended anyone to read it? Around midnight, curiosity finally won. I carefully unfolded the pages inside. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded. At the top was a date, 6 years earlier, just 4 months after my divorce. My chest tightened, then I started reading. Ethan, you'll probably never see this letter. That's why I'm writing it. I stopped, read the sentence again, then continued. The words weren't dramatic. There were no grand confessions, no declarations of love, just honesty. The kind people only allow themselves when they believe nobody will ever hear it. She wrote about watching my marriage slowly fall apart, about seeing how much pain I hid from everyone around me, about how difficult it was pretending everything was normal whenever our paths crossed. One paragraph in particular stayed with me. You always looked like a man carrying something too heavy to put down. I stared at those words for a long time, because they were true. Back then, I had been carrying a lot more than a failed marriage. I had been carrying disappointment, loneliness, shame, the feeling that somehow I'd failed at building the life I'd wanted. As I kept reading, something else became clear. Megan understood me better than I realized. Better than most people. Maybe better than anyone. Then I reached the final page, and everything changed. The last paragraph read, "There are things I wish I could tell you, Ethan. Things I've spent years trying not to feel. Maybe one day I'll find the courage. But right now losing your friendship feels less frightening than risking your happiness." I lowered the letter slowly. My heart was pounding. Not because she'd said the words directly. Because she hadn't, but because she didn't need to. The meaning was obvious. Megan had written this letter 6 years ago, and somehow never sent it. The realization hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I'd assumed she was simply part of my past, a familiar face connected to my former life. Now I wasn't so sure. Suddenly, dozens of moments I'd forgotten began resurfacing. Conversations, shared smiles, small acts of kindness, things I'd never questioned before. Things that looked very different now. The next morning I found Megan sitting alone on the porch. The wooden box rested beside her chair, as always. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me, and somehow she knew. "You read it." I nodded. She closed her eyes briefly. Not angry, not surprised, almost relieved. "I never meant for you to find it," she said quietly. "Why didn't you send it?" For a moment, she looked toward the mountains. Then she smiled sadly. "Because sometimes loving someone means choosing silence." The answer hit me harder than the letter itself. I opened my mouth to ask another question. The question, the one both of us had been avoiding. But before either of us could speak, a car pulled into the driveway. Fast, too fast. Megan's face immediately lost all color. I turned toward the window, and my stomach dropped, because I recognized the driver instantly, Olivia, my ex-wife, and judging by the look on her face, she wasn't here for a friendly visit. Rihuk. As Olivia stepped out of the car and slammed the door behind her, I realized something terrifying. The biggest secret in this story wasn't hidden inside Megan's wooden box. It was standing in my driveway. For a few seconds, nobody moved. I stood by the front window watching Olivia climb out of her car. Megan sat frozen on the porch. The color had completely drained from her face. And suddenly, I understood something. Megan hadn't been worried about a stranger finding her. She'd been worried about Olivia. The front door opened before either of us could say anything. Olivia stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Some habits never changed. She looked exactly the same as the last time I'd seen her. Confident, composed, controlled, at least on the surface. But her eyes told a different story. She was furious. "Ethan!" Then her gaze shifted to Megan. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. "Megan." Neither woman smiled. Neither woman even tried. The tension between them felt years old. And maybe it was. "What are you doing here?" Olivia asked. The question wasn't directed at me. It was aimed entirely at Megan. Megan slowly stood. "I didn't come to fight." Olivia laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "That's funny." "Olivia." "No," she interrupted. "I think we're done pretending." I had no idea what she meant, but judging by Megan's expression, she did. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Not because nobody spoke, because it felt like I was standing in the middle of a conversation that had started years before I arrived. Finally, I stepped forward. "Can somebody tell me what's happening?" Neither answered immediately. Then Olivia looked directly at me, and what she said next hit harder than I expected. "Did she tell you why we stopped speaking?" I glanced toward Megan. She lowered her eyes. No. Of course she didn't. The bitterness in Olivia's voice was impossible to miss. For a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen during our marriage. Hurt. Real hurt. The kind people carry when they feel betrayed. You were my best friend, Olivia said to Megan. I know. No, I don't think you do. The room fell silent again. Then Olivia turned back toward me. You think she's here because she needs help. Isn't she? Olivia shook her head, slowly, almost sadly. No, Ethan. Her next words landed like a punch. She's here because she's been carrying feelings for you for years. My chest tightened. Megan closed her eyes. Not because the statement was false, because it was true. The room became very quiet. I looked at Megan. She didn't deny it, didn't argue, didn't defend herself. That silence told me everything, but Olivia wasn't finished. In fact, she continued, I started noticing it long before my marriage ended. The accusation hung in the air, heavy, dangerous. For the first time since reading the letter, doubt crept into my mind. Had Olivia known all along? Had everyone known except me? And more importantly, had Megan's feelings started while I was still married? The question hit harder than I wanted to admit, because if the answer was yes, everything changed. Megan finally looked up. There were tears in her eyes now, not dramatic tears, exhausted tears, the kind that come from carrying something too long. That's not what happened, she said quietly. Olivia folded her arms. Then tell him the truth. Megan stared at the floor. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered 4 words. I never crossed that line. The conviction in her voice surprised me. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because now there were 2 stories. Olivia's version and Megan's version. And for the first time since she arrived at my house, I didn't know which one to believe. That night after Olivia finally left, Megan asked if she could tell me everything. No secrets, no half-truths, no more hiding. What she revealed next would force me to completely rethink every memory I had of the last 10 years. After Olivia left, neither of us spoke for a long time. The house felt different, smaller somehow, like the walls themselves had heard everything and were waiting for answers. Megan sat at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of tea that had long gone cold. I stood by the window watching darkness settle over the backyard. My mind kept replaying Olivia's accusation. She's been carrying feelings for you for years. The words refused to leave me alone. Finally, Megan broke the silence. She's right about one thing. I turned toward her. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. I did have feelings for you. Hearing the words out loud felt different from reading them in the letter. More real, more dangerous. But she's wrong about the rest. I pulled out a chair and sat down. For the first time since she'd arrived, there was nowhere left for either of us to hide. When did it start? I asked quietly. Megan smiled sadly. I honestly don't know. The answer wasn't what I expected. She took a deep breath. It wasn't one moment. Then she looked at me. It was hundreds of little moments. I didn't speak, I just listened. The way you treated people. The way you always helped everyone before helping yourself. The way you made everyone feel welcome. She laughed softly. You probably don't even remember half the things you did. Maybe she was right, because I didn't remember most of them. What I do remember, she continued, is spending years trying to convince myself those feelings weren't real. Her eyes drifted toward the wooden box sitting on the counter. For a long time, I thought they would disappear. And they didn't. She shook her head. No. The answer was immediate, certain, painfully honest. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she continued, That's why I started avoiding you. That surprised me. What? She nodded. You remember those family barbecues I stopped attending? I did. The holiday dinners. I remembered those too. I wasn't busy, Ethan. A lump formed in my throat. I stayed away because being around you became too difficult. The confession hit harder than anything Olivia had said. Not because it was dramatic, because it explained things I'd never understood. Years of distance, missed events, unanswered invitations. Moments that suddenly made sense. I never wanted to hurt Olivia, she said. Not once. Tears filled her eyes. I loved her too. And for the first time, I believed her completely. Because this wasn't the voice of someone defending herself. It was the voice of someone exhausted from carrying guilt. Megan slowly walked over to the wooden box and opened it. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, old event tickets, small pieces of a life. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate. Just memories. Years of memories. The kind people keep when they're afraid of forgetting. I should have thrown it away. You couldn't, she looked at me. No. The answer barely rose above a whisper. Then she smiled sadly. Because every time I tried, it felt like I was throwing away part of my life. The room fell silent, and suddenly I realized something. For years, I'd thought Megan was simply part of my past, a familiar face connected to my marriage. But while I was rebuilding my life after the divorce, she had been fighting a completely different battle, one I never even knew existed. Then a strange thought hit me. A memory. Small, insignificant. At least I'd always assumed it was. But now it felt important. Because maybe Megan wasn't the only one who had been ignoring certain feelings all these years. That night, lying awake in bed, I remembered something from nearly 8 years earlier. A moment I'd dismissed the second it happened, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Because for the first time, I began wondering if the person keeping secrets all these years hadn't just been Megan. Maybe I'd been hiding one from myself too. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, another memory surfaced. A conversation, a glance, a moment I'd forgotten, or maybe chosen to forget. It's strange how memory works. Sometimes a single piece of information changes the way you see an entire decade. By morning, I found myself sitting alone on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the mountains in the distance, trying to make sense of everything, trying to make sense of myself. For years, I'd told myself the same story. My marriage ended. Life moved on. Everyone moved on. Simple, clean, finished. But now, I wasn't so sure. Because the more I thought about Megan's confession, the more certain memories refused to stay buried. Like the time my truck broke down 3 hours from home. Megan had been the first person to call and check on me. Not Olivia, not my brother. Megan, or the year my father passed away. I remembered dozens of people attending the funeral. But only one person stayed afterward to help clean up. Megan. Then there was the night I'd gotten food poisoning during a neighborhood fundraiser. Embarrassing memory. Yet somehow Megan had known exactly what medicine to bring, exactly what I needed. At the time, I'd thought she was simply kind. Now I wondered if there had been something deeper behind all those moments. The realization made me uncomfortable. Not because of her, because of me. How had I missed it? Or worse, had I noticed it and simply refused to acknowledge it? Around noon, I found Megan in the backyard. The wooden box sat beside her on a garden bench. Sunlight filtered through the trees as she sorted through old photographs. For a moment, I simply watched. Not the photographs. Her, the woman who had carried this secret for years. The woman who had risked losing friendships, relationships, and peace of mind just to avoid hurting other people. Finally, she looked up. A faint smile appeared. What? I shook my head. Nothing. She laughed softly. That's usually not true. I smiled despite myself. Then the words came out before I could stop them. I think I owe you an apology. Her expression changed immediately. For what? I sat down beside her. For not seeing you. She stared at me, confused. I continued. For years I thought I knew exactly who you were. I glanced toward the photographs. But I only saw the version of you that fit into my life. The smile disappeared, and suddenly, neither of us seemed able to look away. I never realized how much you were carrying. Emotion filled her eyes. Not sadness, relief, as if hearing those words mattered more than she expected. Then I took a deep breath, because there was something else I needed to admit. Something I'd only realized a few hours earlier. When Olivia left me, I said quietly, I convinced myself I was done needing people. Megan listened without interrupting. I stopped answering calls. I avoided friends. I built a life where nobody could disappoint me again. The confession felt heavier than I expected, because it was true, painfully true. Then I looked directly at her. And somehow you're the only person who never stopped showing up. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt honest, maybe for the first time. Then Megan lowered her eyes, and what she said next hit me harder than anything else. Ethan, that's exactly why I have to leave. The words felt like a punch to the chest. What? She stood slowly. Tears filled her eyes. I never should have come here. Every alarm inside me immediately went off, because suddenly the future I'd been imagining began slipping away. And for the first time since Megan arrived, I realized I might lose her. That evening, I heard the guest room closet open. Then I heard the sound I'd been dreading, the zipper of the duffel bag. And when I looked down the hallway, Megan was packing to leave. I stood, frozen, in the hallway. The sound of that zipper closing felt louder than it should have. Maybe because I knew what it meant. For days, Megan had been living in my house. For days, every question had slowly led us here. And now, just when everything was finally becoming clear, she was leaving. I walked toward the guest room. The door was open. Megan knelt beside the bed, folding clothes into the navy blue duffel bag. The wooden box sat nearby, ready to go. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked up. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. You shouldn't have packed that yet, I said. A sad smile appeared. That's exactly why I packed it. I leaned against the doorway. I don't understand. Yes, you do. The answer came quietly. Too quietly. Because part of me did understand. The closer we'd become, the harder staying had become. Not easier. Harder, for both of us. Megan zipped the bag shut and sat on the edge of the bed. I spent years convincing myself I could live with these feelings. She looked down at her hands. And then I came here. The room fell silent. You made coffee every morning. A faint laugh escaped her. You asked how my day was. Another pause. We watched terrible movies. I smiled, despite myself. She smiled too. Then the smile disappeared. And suddenly I wasn't imagining a life anymore. The words hit me harder than I expected, because I knew exactly what she meant. The dream had become real, and real things are dangerous. Real things can be lost. I can't stay here hoping for something that might never happen, she whispered. The honesty in her voice hurt, because she wasn't asking for promises. She wasn't demanding anything. She was simply protecting herself. For years, she'd lived with uncertainty. She couldn't do it anymore. I wanted to say something, anything, but fear stopped me. The same fear that had followed me since my divorce. The fear of being wrong, the fear of needing someone, the fear of opening a door that couldn't be closed again. So instead, I watched her stand. I watched her pick up the duffel bag. I watched her carry the wooden box toward the front door, and with every step, a realization grew stronger inside me. If she walked away tonight, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened. The thought terrified me, not because of regret, because for the first time in years I genuinely cared about losing someone. Megan reached the driveway just after sunset. Her car sat waiting near the curb. The duffel bag disappeared into the trunk. Then she carefully placed the wooden box beside it. I stood on the porch, still saying nothing, still frozen, still afraid. Megan opened the driver's door, then paused. For a second I thought she might look back. She didn't, and somehow that hurt even more, because it felt final. The engine started, the headlights came on. The car slowly began rolling backward, and that's when something inside me finally broke. Not sadness, not loneliness. The wall I'd spent 4 years building around my heart. Before I could think about it, I was already running. As Megan's car reached the end of the driveway, I ran into the cold evening after her. Because for the first time since my divorce, I knew exactly what I wanted. The only question was whether I was already too late. "Megan!" My voice echoed across the street. The car stopped. For a second, nothing happened. The engine remained running. The brake lights glowed red against the darkening evening. Then the driver's door slowly opened. Megan stepped out. The cold wind pulled at her hair as she turned toward me. I was breathing hard by the time I reached the driveway. Not because of the distance, because I had spent 4 years running from moments exactly like this. Moments that required vulnerability. Moments that required courage. Moments where there were no guarantees. Megan looked at me carefully, as if she was afraid to hope. "Ethan," I shook my head. "No." The word came out faster than I intended. "No, don't leave yet." For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence felt enormous. Then Megan gave a small, sad smile. "You don't have to do this." "Do what?" "Feel responsible for me." The answer almost made me laugh, because after everything we'd been through, she still didn't understand. "This isn't about responsibility." Her expression softened slightly. "Then what is it about?" The question hung between us. For years I would have avoided it, deflected it, changed the subject. But I was tired of doing that. Tired of pretending I didn't care. Tired of convincing myself I was safer alone. So I finally told the truth. When my marriage ended, I stopped believing in second chances. Megan listened quietly. I told myself I was fine. I built routines. I filled my days. I convinced everyone, including myself, that I was happy. I laughed softly. The problem was, I wasn't. Her eyes never left mine. For the first time, I wasn't speaking to avoid silence. I was speaking because the words mattered. You showed up at my door, and at first I thought I was helping you. I glanced toward the duffel bag sitting in her trunk. The truth is, you changed something in me. Emotion appeared in her eyes. I continued. You reminded me what it feels like to look forward to seeing someone. You reminded me that life isn't supposed to be lived behind walls. A tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, and somehow that simple gesture made everything feel even more real. Then I took one final step closer. I don't know what happens next. The honesty surprised even me. I don't know if we'll get everything right. I don't know if it'll be easy. But I know one thing. Megan waited, holding her breath. So do I, she whispered. I smiled. For the first time in years, it felt natural. Not forced, not polite. Real. Slowly, she closed the distance between us. And when she took my hand, it felt strangely familiar, like something that should have happened a long time ago. Not because fate had planned it, but because two people had finally stopped running from the truth. 1 year later, the duffel bag still sat in my house, not packed, not hidden, stored in the guest room closet. The wooden box sat on a bookshelf in the living room, its secrets no longer needed protecting. Some weekends, Olivia even stopped by for coffee. The road to forgiveness hadn't been easy, but time had a way of softening sharp edges. Most importantly, the house no longer felt empty. The silence that once followed me everywhere had disappeared, replaced by conversation, laughter, life. Sometimes I still think about that night. The knock at 10:47 p.m., the rain, the mysterious duffel bag, the fear, the uncertainty. Back then I thought Megan had arrived carrying the weight of her past. Funny thing is, I was wrong, because the real thing she'd been carrying all those years wasn't regret. It was courage. The courage to finally walk toward the life she wanted, and in doing so, she gave me the courage to do the same. Sometimes the people who change your life don't arrive with answers. Sometimes they arrive with a worn-out duffel bag, a box full of memories, and a question neither of you is brave enough to ask, until it's almost too late.